Well, hello, and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson, Tim Shaw, and Bo Higgins. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. But most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that all veterans deserve a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, you can earn, and you can build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. My primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode. Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Bo Higgins, and I have the pleasure today to be here with our guest, Michael Osburn. We will look forward to talking to him about some of his story of how he got to where he is today. And really, for those that don't know about the MilVet, or maybe tuned in for one of the first times, the MilVet is out there to primarily help veterans looking to get executive roles in the private equity and venture capital space, working in a space that sometimes can be foreign to veterans. But we like to bring on guests that have some experience in that world and maybe share some expertise with folks that are interested in getting into private equity, venture capital, and learn about transition and hopefully pick up some tricks of the trade that can help you get in that world. So without further ado, Michael, I'd love you to kind of introduce yourself a little bit to our audience.
Sure. My name's Michael Osburn. Been working out on my own for the last probably 10 years now, working in the real estate private equity world. You know, we help a lot of investors and developers kind of solve problems around construction. I think it was a interesting transition. I did some work overseas in a couple of wild places like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia. And so coming back and working in private equity real estate, it has a unique set of challenges and skills that are required that you pick up overseas working in places where you maybe don't know the language. And so, I've always enjoyed being outside. I think that is probably one of the things that's common throughout my career. I have a hard time sitting still, sitting behind a desk. I love building things, taking things apart, jumping off things, climbing things. So it's been a good transition. Construction's been great to me, and really enjoyed being outside.
I'd love to dig in, just kind of go back to the beginning of, it's in an interesting space and not one that maybe a lot of people know about, is the private equity space for real estate. It's huge, but again, I think it's kind of a niche within a niche in some ways, right? So, how did it all start? And I know obviously we've shared some ground in Afghanistan and other unique places across the globe that you've been to. I know you were not there in uniform per se, but working for the U.S. government. But how did you kind of get? What was the beginning of all this? How did it all start to kind of? We know where you are today, and we'll talk about how you got there. But how did you kind of? What were the initial ideas of getting into this space?
Sure. I think, it started out honestly in college. I was in engineering undergrad. I thought I wanted to do sports medicine, biomedical engineering, and I realized being in a lab or med school probably wasn't a good fit for me. And so I literally asked some classmates, like, what engineering can you do outside? And they were like, civil engineering. So I thought that was a great transition while I was in school, but I didn't know what civil engineering was. And so during one of my summers, I interned at a civil engineering firm, and I got some experience, working outside on crews, laying pipe on highways and doing some stuff out in the field. But then I also had some very interesting experience like behind a computer. And I was like, I don't know if this civil engineering thing is for me. And so the next summer I did some structural engineering work where, again, I kind of saw a bunch of guys, pecking away behind the keyboard that didn't seem very happy. And I kept, plugging along in school, but going, I just don't know if this structural engineering thing is for me. And so in grad school, I ended up transitioning to what was known as forensic engineering. And cool thing about forensic engineering is you're out on job sites solving problems in reverse, right? Kind of piecing together the crime scene of what happened, so to speak. And there is no playbook. There's no set of rules. It's just kind of here's the information, figure it out. We need the best answer. And so I really liked the variety. I really liked being outside. I worked for a lot of different clients in that space. The funny thing they don't tell you is like the problems you solve over and over are the same problems. My building leaks, something happened to my construction schedule. And so I knew that forensic engineering was great, but it wasn't very proactive for me. because I wanted to sort of solve these problems before they started. And so I really was looking for the folks that were spending the money, that were making these key decisions beforehand. And so that's kind of how I moved out of engineering more into general construction, and then eventually into private equity, where, if people are in real estate private equity, a lot of times developers are spending somebody else's money. It's usually the private equity group who is kind of vetting the different developers and sponsors to give them, several tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's a kind of an intelligence piece, gathering open source information, talking to references. That's really interesting because your track record only is part of the story, right? And so that private equity world is very interesting. And there's credit investors, there's equity investors, and so you can go down a lot of rabbit holes pretty quickly on real estate and construction.
It's a fascinating progression to get from what I think most people think of as engineering, the civil side or the structural side. And I honestly, to be candid, I've never really even heard of forensic engineering, but it sounds fascinating. It makes sense when you talk about it, of having to go out there and do those type of things and be the triage person, like on site itself, to figure that out. And then to see where that pivoted. I mean, obviously that's what you were asked to do overseas a lot. I mean, how did you get connected from what you initially started doing with the federal government and doing some of the projects overseas? What was kind of that progression for you?
So it was interesting. When I was in grad school, I took a Middle Eastern Studies course, pass fail, and the professor called me into his office literally like the first day. I was like, "Why are you in my class? You're in graduate engineering school." I was like, "Oh, I'm going to go build skyscrapers in Dubai." Little did I know they don't let 24-year-olds really do that. They don't recruit from Texas to go do that. So, I ended up having to settle for a job in Dallas after grad school. But I'd always kind of been poking around trying to figure out how to get into the Middle East, because it was kind of a very unique part of my generation's time. And there was a lot going on. I had friends in the Army and the Marine Corps working over there. And so I ended up getting connected to a group in Saudi Arabia. Got to go work on kind of what's known as a mega project. I mean, there was billions of dollars under construction in Riyadh, and I was brought on to help just as an advisor, keep an eye on things on behalf of the ministry and the university. And so while I was there, again, talking to my Army and Marine Corps buddies, keep an eye on things in Iraq and Afghanistan, I noticed there was a common theme of, lots of construction money being poorly spent, projects, behind schedule, over budget, and call it, naivete, call it, unwavering sense of confidence. I thought I could do that job better than anybody else. And so I started applying for jobs. There was interesting swath of private and public jobs that were out there. And I got some offers on the private industry that just didn't feel right. Like they were throwing money at you, telling you, all the great things about it, but there was no real process to the recruiting or, actually understanding what the job entails. And so I ended up, randomly getting a call from a group in Kabul that said, "Hey, we've got this PRT job, Provincial Reconstruction Team job, going to Kunar." And honestly, if you'd asked me what my ideal job was, I got it. Like, that was it. Like, I was going to a place that was pretty wild and crazy. Less so, in 2010 than it was in 2005 when some other Marines I know that were there. But it was a way for me to kind of do my part and help out as quick as I could, without having to, start back over in boot camp or OCS or something like that.
It's pretty. I mean, I've had the pleasure to be in Afghanistan. I spent 3 tours over there, and I've made up the Kunar. It's out there. There's not a whole lot out there, and you're right. I think the thing that you hit the nail on the head about is the challenges of getting projects built overseas. I mean, there's so many. I don't know how many projects I saw started, never finished, to be candid, right? Whether they were infrastructure projects for, in Iraq or in Afghanistan to get the new power plant going, or the new water being supplied going. And I think probably, I would say 80% of them never got finished for whatever reason it is. And again, I don't know, you probably got to see it firsthand of what all those problems were, but clearly we needed someone like you to get over there to deliver on these things. Because I know we were always trying to get the locals involved, and that was part of the deal. And sometimes they'd show up, sometimes they wouldn't. It was always something. You always heard an excuse like, inshallah, right? In Iraq especially. God willing. I mean, God wasn't very willing a lot of times over there. I don't know what your experience was, or how were you able to maybe navigate that in a place where I know how hard it was just to get the labor and the supplies and everything was hard. It seems like over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I say a lot in our industry now and kind of our work. I say the soft skills are the hard skills, right? And like, so like there's a lot of indirect approaches that are needed in places like that, where that people aren't just watching what you say, they're watching what you do. And so the program, the PRT program in Afghanistan came out of Iraq, like you said, like I think it was SERP, the Commander's Emergency Response Program. And so like the idea was that a lot of the battle space owners needed kind of a slush fund to do small scale, quick impact projects. So we particularly weren't working on the big power plant generation, barracks type jobs that were $40 million. We were doing a $250,000 school, an orphanage, a clinic, a bridge, a road. And we were really trying to create buy-in from the locals, teach them how to do things on their own, and then also get intelligence on where the bad guys were, right? And so, it was impactful when you're on the front lines, right? Like it's different than if you're at brigade or division or back in, DC or Kabul. And so I think there's definitely layers to being out, in the field and then being back in the office and kind of supporting people. And so as a civilian, I was not very, like, I was kind of the new guy, always asking too many questions and saying, hey, what about this? Like, this program has been alive in Afghanistan for 5 years. Like, where are all our historical costs? Because we were getting, raked over the coals from one province to the next. And so, we found some books that, Leavenworth, they were publishing out of Leavenworth called Center for Army Lessons Learned. And we're like, hey, when you come into the program, like, you should read these. Like, this is a way to get up to speed quickly. Like, and it was pretty fascinating to me how disjointed the system was, right? And at the end of the day, the cohesiveness of like being out on the field and being on the fob, like that's your team, that's your family. Like you're trying to go make things happen. And it is way different than what people say, back at Bagram and Kabul or DC. And so I think that was pretty eye opening to me.
Yeah, no, I as a guy that I spent a year working the Afghan local police program, and we had little teams all over the country that we called them. They were the tripwire, if you will, out there on the front edge. So if they would hear something first before it got to Kabul or got to Kandahar or some of the other bigger cities, right? But it was. But I say this too, though, the impact you could have in those small villages by providing a school, providing something for the women to learn how to sew, providing just little projects that were, maybe, hundreds, couple $100,000, maybe even less than that in some cases. The impact they could have to turn around the attitude of an entire village or an entire region was massive. And your point is well made. Like, it's lead by action, right? Lead, show them that you're committed to the country as much as they are. Now, again, it's a lot more complicated than that, and the whole back and forth and dynamic of the Taliban and us wanting to get things done and us being there only for a temporal period of time. Even being there for a year is not enough, right? They're there forever,
Right.
and it was definitely hard to sometimes build that trust, right? That, hey, we're, understand that we want to get things done in our timeline of 6 months. And they're like, look, man, we live here. We're going to be here for 50 years. We got to do it our way or it's not going to work. It's just interesting how do you understand that and incorporate the culture of the location into what you're trying to do. And I'm curious if you have any like stories about that, because the culture of Afghanistan is different than Iraq, is different than Saudi Arabia, and they're all a little different. You got to really understand that to be successful, I would say.
I would say there's a couple things that I did, now looking back, like I'm glad I did them. I wish I probably did even more. Before I got there, I was reading anything and everything I could on the country of Afghanistan, specifically like, from, the first CIA officers into the country to, anybody, journalists and anybody else writing stuff. And then really focused on a lot of the area where I was going, like Eastern Afghanistan, right? Like the different tribes, the different cultures. And then if you think about like history, right? Like the Russians and the British, and then even back to like the days of Alexander the Great, like there's tons of stuff that sort of can teach you things that you don't have to learn on your own experience. And so before I even set foot in the country, like I knew probably more than most of the people in my unit that were there. And what was fascinating to me was, I'm sure you've heard of the book, like Team of Teams, right? Like I was on the PRT is, the very basic team of teams. It was a hodgepodge of civilians and military. We were part of the J9 shop, the civil military ops. And so like, there was a lot of people that would rotate in and out on a different schedule. Some of them trained in, Atterbury together. I showed up as a new guy, like in August. And so, there's a way where you have to build trust very quickly. And you do that by kind of demonstrating understanding, demonstrating the ability to listen, ask questions. What was really cool is like when I was on the FOB, I sort of made the decision I'd get up and I wanted to be first in the DFAC every morning, have coffee, be ready to go no matter what was going to happen after the sun came up. And so there were a lot of guys that were coming in from being out all night that rode around on quads and had beards and wore shorts all the time. And I'd talk to them. And they were like, "Who are you?" I'm like, "Who are you?" Like, "Well, we can't tell you." I was like, "Well, I'm an engineer. I'm on the PRT. This is where I go." And it was fascinating because they're like, "Wait, we want to go to that village." I'm like, "Cool. Like, I go to that village like once a week. Like, you should go with me. Like, I'd love to have a shooter on the team." And like, it was just a way to like ultimately network and help find where the problems were and point the right people to the problem. And like, it was pretty fascinating how, again, kind of discombobulated the effort was, like when you get down to it on what everybody's doing out on the front lines.
Yeah, as an Intel guy, I certainly can appreciate that and the frustrations you had with that. I remember trying to get information in particular from my lens from the DEA, because the DEA had a lot of information on the drug routes because of all the opium trading that was coming in Western Afghanistan down into Pakistan. But like, their information was in a whole different world than like military information. Right. But they had really cool stuff if you could find the right guy. But like, there was no one-stop shop to bring it all together, to your point, right? And it's interesting you're saying that obviously the Civ Mil guys were doing their thing and they had a list of projects, but the guys that were on the pointy end trying to do, find the bad guy, if you will, had a very different set of information than they were looking at as well. And we didn't do a great job, I will always say, of bringing that all together a lot of times. There's sometimes, there's always exceptions to that rule, but it's hard. It's not that easy. It's difficult to bring them all together. I'll say that too, but especially when you have the constant rotation of people and someone that can really maintain that, really good common operating picture, it can be a challenge. I think we did it pretty well, I think, with General Miller and the CIFSOC guys, but it's a challenge for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is like getting back to the fundamentals, right? Of like, you go out on a mission, like you're writing a report, you're kind of doing your after action. Like we do that on the Force Pro side, but even internally on our team, like the PRT, like sharing lessons learned across provinces. I mean, it's the same thing we do in our work today, where it's like you go out, you got to write down stuff, you got to talk to as many people as you can, read as much as you can, and just kind of synthesize a lot of different sources of information to really find like, hey, what is the thing that matters? Like, what is the one thing we should be doing? And so I think that was something I kind of just embodied by chance of the situation I was in over there, but like it's really stuck with me and for me, being a civilian, like I wanted to make sure I was an asset to the team, not a liability, right? Like there were a lot of civilians over there that didn't show up fit. They didn't show up understanding what was going on. It's like, if anything, I was going to be carrying the guys on my team out, like, cause I was, making sure I was fit enough and in the know enough of where we were going and what was happening. And so we tried to do the best we can. And I think that's like, honestly, just having that, I think you've probably heard the term like bias for action, right? Like it's one thing to talk about it, but like kind of be out there doing it and getting it done is a whole different thing.
I love that, man. Again, I think bias for action and understand to your point, be very singularly focused on what's your customer, what do you got to get done? What is the objective we're here for? Because you can get lost in a lot of things, but keep it simple, make everybody sure they're aligned, and that's a recipe of success for sure. Well, how did you then, I guess, I would ask, and how did you leverage that experience? Or, you obviously gained a lot, pretty cool real world experience out there, supporting the military and the PRTs and other overseas, things you did. But how did you take that and maybe pivot into, maybe I call it the next phase of your career? Did you learn from that and decide what you wanted to go next? Or how did you kind of make the next transition from there?
Yeah, I would say there's probably some of my friends that have, I've met in the military since then. They can relate to this. Like I was kind of young, like probably a little too used to gunfire and helicopters and realized like I needed to settle down. And like this could have been my life for the next, 3 decades. There were guys over there that had been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think trying to understand like what I wanted to do afterwards was I liked being outside, right? Like I knew I was going to do something in construction. I knew engineering really wasn't my thing because it was less people focused and more problem focused and kind of too technical in nature. So I gravitated more towards the just general construction stuff. I knew I really liked Texas and Tennessee. And so I sort of, again, using those skills I had from being overseas of like talking to everyone, really networking hard. Like I was talking to a lot of different people, and I started that before my deployment was up, right? Like I was on a deployment, like trying to figure out like, okay, if I'm not going to re-up, like what am I doing next, right? And like, where am I going to do it? Who do I know? And so I really, I mean, it's not, they say a lot of times, like, it's simple, not easy, right? Like it's like creating a list of like, what do I want to do? Who do I need to talk to? Who's doing the thing that I want to do? Who should I talk to? And that's been there, done that. Right. And so that was a probably a 3 to 6 month process. And then I would say even coming back, like reorienting into civilian life, like I wasn't over there very long. Like I didn't see a whole lot of crazy fighting, but like it definitely took a little bit to like reacclimate back to, sort of normal civilian life. And that was, another process of just trying to stay busy, trying to stay focused and really, kind of watch out for your health and your work. Right. I think those are two big things that kind of, get lost. I mean, I know a lot of veterans that are sort of struggling right now just to kind of find that next mission, right? Find that next purpose. And I'd say as becoming a dad later in my life, like it's much easier to kind of singular focus on like the mission of like, I want to give my kids a better life than I had. I mean, I had Afghan villagers telling me that. Like I didn't understand it at the time because I didn't have a wife and kids, but now like I totally get it. And so I think that is a big thing on kind of the transition piece that I think a lot of people hopefully will, kind of take to heart.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I mean the military, in theory, they have a whole interesting program for everyone to go through in classes and whatnot. I don't think people do it as well as you did it with understanding your focus and making those lists and going out there and just talking to people. I think one of the things I say all the time though is there's something about when you actually are in the military and have that uniform on, you can get very institutionalized where you become part of this big machine, if you will, and you lose contact with the real world in some ways, right? I mean, especially if you've been deployed a ton and you're in that cycle of being over there and you've been in the, downrange a lot. It's hard to get out and then all of a sudden just think, oh, I'm going to go work behind a computer. I mean, you can't get there from here, and not that you want to go work behind a computer, but even I think your ability though to network, because you were doing it, what your job is in many ways is networking, right? To get things completed, to get things, the projects, on time delivered, you have to have that network of people to be successful, right? And I think there's something about military guys that they don't appreciate, that what they're doing a lot of their careers is networking, but somehow they have a hard time doing it outside of the military. They have a hard time reaching out to people that weren't in the military. Like, well, what do I have to offer? I was just an infantryman down. I'm like, you have a ton to offer. You just don't know it. And you think, it's a perception that needs to be broken for our veterans of not being or not wanting or being willing to network, whereas that is what they did for most of their careers in many ways. But they think somehow now it's a dirty word if they're getting out of the military. It's just interesting to see that.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of people.
I agree. I think one of the things that as I've gotten older, there's a different, the way I network, I think is different than a lot of people would assume the word means. Like I find it hard to sort of connect with people when you're at these like big events and they're quote unquote networking events, right? Like the way I think about network is honestly, like when I was over there, like I was developing a network of people that could help keep me safe, could help get information for me that like, so like I am kind of putting my head into places that probably shouldn't belong and like asking people questions, writing down phone numbers, writing down names. And so like, you have to build your network before you need it. Like ask anybody that's ever had a job in Intel. Like if something happens and you have no network, like you're 5 years late. Like it literally takes years to do. And so if you think you want to go into a certain industry or a certain job, like you should do that well as far in advance as you can, and talking to people. And I think the other thing people forget and get wrong is like they have a network built in. All their friends they text, all their family they talk to, everybody you've sent an email or a phone call to, like you have a network. You just are kind of not tapping into it or not using it actively. And I mean, it requires work to stay in touch. And I mean, the joke is now with our work that we do, it's like, talk to Mike, he's got a guy, right? Like
Yep.
I am that like quintessential gray man. Like everything we do is not black and white. Like we want to operate in the messy gray area because we know nobody else is willing to do the hard stuff. And like we are, and like we'll connect the dots. We'll connect the dots people didn't even know existed. And so I think that's something, I mean, frankly, like it's a mindset, right? Like you have to
Yeah.
have the mindset that like you can do it, and you are going to actively do it and kind of be a participant, that's kind of directing the ship versus just somebody riding on board.
No, I love that. And again, I like my grandmother used to say, you got to know Joe. When you get something done, you got to know Joe, right? So same kind of thing. You got to know the guy out there, and somebody knows that guy, and it's invaluable to be that guy that is the connector that can pull those people together and pull teams together and just get things done, get the permit when you need to get this, just to have that ability is huge. Well, how did you, or when did you form your own company again? What was that thought process? And I mean, maybe it's again, bring us up to today, kind of what, yeah, that's what it sounds like to me, that you're a problem solver. I mean, that sounds like it's a very simplistic way of saying what you do, but big problem, you could like call you, it's going to get done. It sounds like that. Is that a fair thing to say? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like when people ask like, what do you do? I say, yeah, like we solve problems around construction. Like
Yep.
it should be that simple. If it's
Yep.
outside, you're building something, like we think we can solve it. I mean, I've like since I've been back in the States, like we, starting Aristos was kind of out of necessity, right? Like I moved to the private equity world. I was helping, buy real estate on a massive portfolio scale, 100 to $400 million portfolios. We were doing underwriting and due diligence, right? I mean, due diligence is another form of like intelligence gathering, like open source and whatever other proprietary sources. And so like I enjoyed it. I was great at it. I knew how to connect the dots. I knew the problems people would inevitably have. Like having solved problems in reverse, you can kind of see the problems moving forward. And anybody that's done an after action review understands like the more after action reviews and reflection you have, the easier it is to kind of spot the trend or problem going forward. And so, in 2014, I got rolled up in some layoffs with the firm that I was with, and found out I was having a kid the same week. And it was like kind of invention is, or necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like we're like, they tried to hire me back within probably 2 months of letting me go. And I told them no. And so I thought that was at the time, again, I probably was a little young and naive and maybe overconfident, but I was like, look, I know I did nothing wrong. I was doing a great job, but I realized too, like everybody like them needed my help as well. And so I kind of just said, you know what, I'm going to start a company. You can hire my company. And for me, like I can hedge my risk against getting laid off again and do this for you guys and everybody else like you. And kind of built my profile of like my target, right? And like said, this is the company that needs my help. Who are all these other people that I know that fit this profile? And I mean, I started cold calling and emailing and networking to find, our next client and our next one and our next one. And, I've been lucky and blessed to be doing this 10 years later. And I've worked in Lebanon, Kuwait, Mexico, and all across the U.S. since then. And so I kind of joke, like there's only a few places in the world I won't go. I think I've demonstrated that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been great, and very fortunate to have been able to do it.
No, I mean, look, you have to take some risk to get that reward, right? You obviously, when you have the opportunity to take the safety net back, you're like, you know what, you bet on yourself, and that's what you're doing. I think that's you have to, at some point in time, if you're going to get into this space, you have to be willing to bet on yourself, and obviously you've done that and done a great job. And what kind of, just for the audience in general, what kind of projects are you working on today, and what kind of people are you working with, and what kind of projects are you working on?
Well, I can say like it's fun to run across veterans and work with veterans in the real estate and construction world. I mean, it's I still use Ride in the Rain notepads, and like I love passing those out on job sites when it's at Phoenix and 130 and everybody's sweating all over their notebooks. Like, hey, like you should check this out. Like I learned about this working in the military a long time ago. I mean, we work a lot with developers and investors. I'd say like, private equity investors that are, family offices, institutional groups, all the way down to kind of, like a wealthy oil and gas guy that bought a couple buildings. The developers could be the largest in their asset class, from student housing or industrial to a couple guys that split off from a big shop and are trying to go do things on their own. And, I think something that would resonate with the audience is like, we're kind of like a force multiplier, right? Like we're the guys you call in to we want to be like a 4-man, high speed, special ops team, not, the 400 unit, like regular, unit. And so like we are trying to be a great resource to people that don't know which way to go. Right. And so I think hopefully that, and we're working all across the US. We like, but we'll go anywhere.
I love it. No, it makes me flashback to my time in the military as an intel guy. You mean as a regular, infantry battalion, you had your intel sources there, but we would augment that in some of these places with it's called a National Intelligence Security Team. So you had a rep from CIA and a rep from DIA, and a rep from NSA that could tap into all those databases and then bring that information down to that unit, right? So that's something they would never have on their own. It's that information and that access to data that makes them that more effective in what they're trying to do. So it sounds like in some ways, you're that facilitator that can bring together maybe the big picture or help people just get through the hard spots that they're having problems with in day to day. So I love that concept of the attachment they needed for a special situation and to be able to help them facilitate, the hardest problems that are out there to make them go away, I guess, in some ways, right?
Yeah. I would say like that and like kind of, a lot of the veterans we've talked to too, like, that you want thinkers on your team, right? Like you need people that can think and lead up and down the chain of command. And that's like, when we show up, there's usually a problem and a lot of people are really pissed off. And so like, we have to be liked, like we have to be the nice guy, but we have to figure out how to indirectly get things done. And so like, just because we're hired by one group doesn't mean we can smash all the other groups that are, not our client, right? Like, and so like you have to really work well with other people, even when they don't want you there. And so I think that's something else that gets lost in like, oh, it's not my job, or like they're not, part of our team. It's like everybody's on the same team here. Like we're trying to get the same thing done, and like you got to find a way to work together. And I think that kind of gets lost in the civilian world of everybody kind of watching their their own back sometimes.
I love it, man. It's a team win, man. I get the team on board. You can't go wrong with that. That's for dang sure. Well, I guess as we kind of wrap things up, I mean, any advice you would have for folks that want to get into this industry? I mean, is it growing? Is it a place people should be? How would you, if somebody was interested in what it sounds pretty cool to me. I didn't know this was the thing out there to be the forensic engineer getting out there, solving problems on the edge and not behind the desk, but out there doing it. I mean, what's your advice to folks that are interested in this kind of line of work?
Yeah, I would say like I think you need to find kind of that thing that you enjoy, right? Like sometimes, being out on a job site is great. Doing it when it's 115, like not everybody wants to do that. Doing it when it's 15 degrees and there's snow on the roof, a lot of people don't want to do that, right? And so like, if I think like when we talk about people that are looking for trying to kind of network and find that next opportunity, it's like, do you want to be at a small organization? Do you want to be at a big one? Obviously, there's risks with each, right? Like some you get into that institutional bureaucratic way. Others, like the company could go out of business because it's too small, right? Like I think really trying to find that thing. Like construction is not going away. Like construction is going to be around. The market in St. Louis may be different than the market in San Antonio or Dallas, but like if you want to be in construction, like you can find an opportunity. I think there's a lot of different things in that space, and same thing with private equity and real estate. Like I think there's a missing layer of kind of leadership in a lot of businesses, and some of the former military guys I know, like they would be great kind of operations officers within civilian organizations, right? Like they know how to kind of coordinate and motivate and frankly lead like when things go wrong, because like things will go wrong. I think that is the thing that a lot of veterans probably, they need to find kind of that place where they can lead with sort of a purpose and be tied into the mission that they really want to get behind.
No, I love it. I think that idea of grit, right? That we get thrown in places all the time as veterans, as military members, with very limited resources, kind of a kind of mission type order to go figure it out. It's like, all right, just go do it, right? If you can do that, if you can do that, then you're going to be successful in a lot of places, especially I think in the venture capital or the private equity world, where there maybe not be a lot of guidance, and it's a pretty small kind of outfit, and you may be a little bit alone. I mean, like, the money's there, but you gotta figure it out. We're not gonna give you a whole lot of guidance. This is kind of all happening, building that airplane in flight. So if you like that kind of challenge, it sounds like that industry may be one that would be a good one for you. Fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think there's kind of probably two sides to that for a lot of veterans looking at the construction space. There's sort of the investment side on real estate, and like maybe they're investing capital in a project, versus, on the private equity side where maybe they're investing in like trade businesses, right? The plumbers, the mechanicals, the roofers, those guys need, they need somebody that's not just turning a wrench to sort of run and lead the business, right? There's a recruiting component, there's a training component, there's kind of a culture component that I think a lot of veterans would be a good fit for. And so I think that it's just kind of really trying to understand like what you want to be doing and find somebody that's maybe done it before to talk to them about what they like, what they didn't like.
Sounds good, man. That's the MilVet's here for. The MilVet's here to bring those type of people to people like you that need them when they need them, or any company you're working with. So give us a holler. We'll find those guys for you. They're out there, and I know they're hopefully listening to the podcast and getting some great information today. So, hey, sure. Thank you so much for the time, Michael. I learned a ton. It's a pleasure working with you. Good luck with all the projects you got going on, and let's stay in touch, and hopefully we can get together soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Bo.
Rock.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. For more content, follow us on Instagram @TheMilitaryVet or on LinkedIn. Join us at an upcoming event or learn more on our website, TheMilVet.org. Feel free to email us directly at leadership@TheMilVet.org. Thank you so much and take care.